Jesus sent his son to pay the price, to pay the penalty for everyone. And I'm so grateful for his attributes, for his goodness, for his faithfulness and his love and his kindness in our lives, because we don't deserve it either. We tend to, I think, scale sin. Well, I'm a sinner, but my sin isn't quite as bad as that other person's sin. I'm not really as bad as my neighbor. And I think we sometimes can justify our sin that way. And in reality, sin is sin is sin.
That's true. Our sin, we might have never committed as heinous a crime. But if we understand God's holiness, that person over there is not the standard. God, who is the holy, righteous judge of the universe, he is the standard. And so when we can help ourselves and our kids understand God's holiness, then we can see our sin in its proper light. That it doesn't matter if we've never treated somebody in the way, that person over there has treated them. We have still sinned against the holy God. And God calls us to reflect his holiness, that he gives us holiness in Jesus. He gives us positional holiness in Jesus. But then we are called to progressive holiness, to be conformed more into the image of Jesus. So we first have to understand God's holiness. And then two other attributes that God invites us to reflect that are so important for us to understand, to understand some of these difficult topics, I think, are God's justice and God's mercy. That we have to understand that God is just. He always does what is right, and he punishes sin. And we give kids the example, just a little kid example that they can understand. What if your brother came in your room when you weren't there without asking, and then he broke it, and then he just left it in his room and didn't do anything with it? Well, when you found that out and you told your parents what happened, what would happen if your parents just said, it's not that big a deal, we're going to let it slide this time? You would be so angry. Why? Because that's not just. Your parents had not treated you fairly. They had not treated your brother fairly by implementing a punishment or a consequence for the way that he sinned against you. And we just inherently know that justice is a good thing, that God would not be a good God if he did not punish us and everyone else for their sin. And we understand this. If there's a police officer who turns a blind eye to a crime because it's committed by somebody that he or she loves, that's unjust. That's similarly if that police officer, incarcerates someone who did not, commit a crime. That is unjust. And so we understand this justice, but then it's not that when God sends Jesus, he just kind of turns a blind eye and is like, it's okay, your sin's not that big a deal. No, God is merciful. He does not give us the punishment that we deserve because of Jesus. That when Jesus was on the cross, he bore God's wrath toward our sin. That, that's why he calls out, my God, why have you forsaken me? Because for the first time in eternity, he was bearing the weight of sin. He was bearing the Father's wrath toward that sin. And that's actually a term that we use even with these little, kids 4 on up, that God's wrath, God's right, just anger towards our sin, Jesus bore that. And so every single sin that has ever been committed will be dealt with justly. That there will be a just punishment for every single sin. Either that person will pay, they may pay some consequences here on this earth for that sin, or they may get away scot-free, in this life. But the punishment will come with eternity separated from God in hell, or that punishment was already placed on Jesus. So helping our kids understand, see biblically and understand the concept of holiness, that, it doesn't matter if we have committed lots of quote unquote little sins, or if we've committed grievous sins. All sin is against God. It does not meet his standards, so that they understand the fact that God is just. In order to be a good God, God must punish sin, because he would be an unjust judge if he just let things slide. But we don't have to pay the penalty for our sin because God is merciful.